A mere feather could have knocked me off my feet. I must have resembled a dumbfounded rookie, rendered speechless in the presence of a great man. Perhaps that's why my father had secured this job for me. At 17, I found myself as the assistant to Sir Henry Macpherson in Egypt. The upcoming archaeological expedition held the promise of discoveries rivaling the legendary achievements of Heinrich Schliemann. But the expedition was doomed. Sir Henry, on the cusp of triumph, vanished under mysterious circumstances one night and was killed, a fact corroborated by the testimonies of the local Arabs. It happened 25 years ago, during the reign of Queen Victoria. I continued my research, diligently working in the modest yet dogged field of Egyptology. My anticipation of meeting Sir Henry on a quiet Alexandrian street was as unlikely as expecting a handshake from Ramses E. Yet, I did see him. He noticed me as well. When Sir Henry offered me his hand, I grasped it. His palm was firm and dry. The years melted away in an instant. I reverted to the stammering boy I once was. He spoke with the same confidence as always. Fate brought us together, David. What astonished me even more than our meeting was his appearance. It's difficult to pinpoint the age of someone so much older than oneself, but he looked precisely the same he had the day we first met in 1899. Quick mental calculations revealed that he should have been over 80 by now. I must explain, he said, as if reading my thoughts. Let's find a secluded spot. I have something to tell you. We took a seat at a Greek cafe, choosing a table outside, but in the depth of the gallery, in the shade. The streets had darkened considerably by now. The rush of daytime had long faded, but evening strollers still wandered the streets. Alexandria was unlike the rest of Egypt. Its modern architecture bore a closer resemblance to European style, and until the call to evening prayer, we could have been sitting on a veranda somewhere in Italy rather than Africa. Sir Henry ordered drinks. The Greek waiter nearly spilled them as he approached, giving Sir Henry a look of open disdain. His disdain was kept in check by the fact that we were Englishmen, and he couldn't stop us from being there. I took a sip as Sir Henry launched into his story. This all began on a street much like this one, he started, his voice quieting to a whisper. Here in Alexandria, an unexpected encounter that was just as thrilling as our own today. It played out like a scene from one of Rider Haggard's novels, a sudden meeting with a mysterious woman veiled from head to toe, leading to extraordinary archaeological discoveries and secrets shrouded in the veil of mystery. An opening, I'm certain, worthy of your pen back in those days. The day I disappeared, I left the excavation site and headed to Alexandria to meet with a small group of colleagues. My thoughts were deep in speculation and anticipation, immersing me in my own world. It wasn't the wisest course of action, even for Alexandria, where there were fewer dangers than on the shadowy streets of Cairo, but caution was still necessary. Nonetheless, I found myself lost in thought, paying little attention to my surroundings. My gaze wandered aimlessly until I nearly collided with a woman dressed in traditional Muslim attire, complete with a chador, but surprisingly without a male escort. She carried a black bag, from which a few small items tumbled out upon our encounter. I quickly apologized, dropping to my knees to help her gather the scattered belongings. Perhaps she didn't hear my apologies, as she addressed me in French. Pardonnez-vous, monsieur, she said in a deep, slightly hoarse voice. Est-ce que vous êtes français? My conversational French was good enough for conferences, and we could have continued in that language, but when our eyes met, I found myself ensnared by her gaze. Most astonishing of all was when she switched to speaking Greek, but not in a classical style, and with an unfamiliar accent. Our meeting is a sign of fate, she said. It pleases our goddess She collected her belongings and fled down the street, stopping at the corner of a building where I could still see her. It was only then that I realized she had placed something in my hand. It was a stone scarab. In my line of work, I'd held hundreds of such items and could easily tell a souvenir from genuine antiquity. This scarab seemed genuine. On its smooth underside was an inscription. I struck a match to illuminate it and read, "Cleopatra." Here came the moment when I had to make a decision, when destiny guided me, or perhaps the gods intervened. Call it what you will. I acted rashly, following her without the excuse of youth or experience. Like a character from a cheap novel, I gave in to instinct, abandoning all rational thought and disregarding the lurking dangers on dark streets. The only thing that keeps me composed is the thought that I was under a spell, that I had no control over my actions, and that the stone scarab was perhaps cursed, like the ruby eye of an Indian idol. Sir Henry fell silent. Darkness enveloped us, especially in our corner. Inside the cafe, a dim lamp flickered, and I watched as the Greek patrons at nearby tables engaged in conversations, casting grim and uneasy glances our way. One of them even made a gesture, known throughout the Mediterranean as protection against the evil eye. "Do you really believe this?" I finally asked. "What kind of magic can exist in our time?" "There are things that transcend time, David. They are eternal. I learned this through my own adventure, which is still unfolding even now, as we speak. So, I followed her." Sir Henry continued his story, "But I cannot say where exactly. You can interpret it however you like. We found ourselves on streets I hadn't known existed in modern Alexandria. I lost my sense of direction. I knew the sea was somewhere close, but couldn't quite pinpoint where exactly it lay. The woman in her cloak moved ahead of me. At first, I noticed the startled gazes of the passers-by, shocked by the sight of a local woman without a male companion, especially with a European man trailing her. Some turned away, others muttered angrily under their breath, and a few even pointed their fingers at us. Perhaps they thought her to be a woman of ill repute, and me her escort for the night. But it didn't matter. I had entered a part of the city completely unfamiliar to me, as if I'd stepped back into the Middle Ages. There were no gas lamps, no sign of French-English influence. The architecture and surroundings reminded me of Cairo's hidden corners, gloomy arches spanning the streets, beggars nestled among animals, settling down to sleep in the corners. From somewhere, a melancholy Arabic song drifted through the air, accompanied by the soft drumming of a tabla. As reckless as I may have been, as entranced or hypnotized as I might have felt, I found some comfort in the weight of the revolver pulling down my right jacket pocket. The scarab I had slipped into my left pocket. We approached a two-story white stucco house with double black doors facing the street. From inside, I could hear a sound that resembled prayer, but the time for Muslim prayer, as far as I knew, had passed, and it didn't sound like any Arab prayer I had ever heard. The doors were unlocked. My cloaked guide pushed them open and gestured for me to enter a spacious portico. I looked around with curiosity. Tall, red and black marble columns, around 20 feet high, supported a dome painted with stars from constellations vaguely familiar to me. Tiny ceramic lamps in ancient style flickered in numerous niches, providing all the lighting. I had been in many homes in Alexandria and seen many cities in Egypt, but nothing quite like this, except perhaps in distant replicas of ancient ruins. The place seemed to breathe antiquity, as if it had risen from the time of the pharaohs. The woman cloaked in her wrap turned back to me and spoke again in the same peculiar Greek dialect. "Wait here. I will announce your arrival." She slipped through another door, and I caught the echo of a man's voice in the same Greek saying something like, "Oh, righteous Charmian, you have returned," she replied, but the door closed behind her, and I couldn't catch the rest. As I waited in the atrium, I found myself alone and began to examine the shelves and niches lining the walls. The artifacts I discovered left me in awe. These were items from Egypt's early dynasties, for which the British Museum would have paid a fortune. Their authenticity was unquestionable. The sheer number of them was astounding. Small statues of gods, figurines for tombs, Ashabti figures, and even a large, ancient bust of a woman with her hair gathered into a bun at the nape of her neck, adorned with a headband reminiscent of those worn by ancient Greek nobility. This sculpture was most likely from the Ptolemaic era, possibly from the 1st or 2nd century BCE. Next to the bust stood a silver bowl and a sacrificial dagger. A remarkable piece. You know how proud I am of my ability to distinguish genuine artifacts. This was no fake. Such an item could only be found in an undisturbed tomb. And at that moment, my mind began to clear from the haze that had been cast upon me by the sorceress. I realized I was in a den of thieves, secret grave robbers, whose motives were far from romantic or mysterious, simply a desire to profit from selling stolen artifacts. I wasn't too worried for my life, but I was grateful I had my revolver with me. Then someone entered the room, and I returned the dagger to its place. "Illustrious Macpherson, welcome to my home," someone said in that same odd, semi-classical Greek. My surname was so distorted that I could barely recognize it. In the doorway stood a man whose age was hard to pinpoint. He was clearly older than me, but without any obvious signs of aging. He wore a loose robe, almost dress-like, but not in the Arabic style. And then it dawned on me, he looked as if he belonged to another era. Everything in the room made sense now. The objects, his attire, the language, it all belonged to the same period. He spoke in a Greek dialect from the time of the Ptolemies, which I had never heard before. I understood his words, but his speech felt as distant from classical Greek as modern English from the language of Chaucer. Hermione made a wise choice. Wait a minute. But as soon as our gazes met, I experienced the same hypnotic and calming effect as with Hermione. This man seemed incredibly old. Looking into his eyes, I felt as if I were plunging into an abyss, into the boundless depths of eternity. "Please, come this way." I was led into an unusual dining room and invited to recline on a couch, as they did in ancient times, while a meal was being prepared for me. My thoughts grew foggy again, scattering in all directions. I wanted to ask how they knew my name, but I didn't, because I hadn't introduced myself to Hermione. If that was her real name, so she couldn't have told them anything unless she had read my mind. Later, I understood that immortals, beings who had lived 2, 3, or even 4,000 years, truly could read our minds, as we were no more than children to them, and our thoughts were as familiar to them as the tricks of a dog or cat, performed for the amusement of their owners. But I digress. Barefoot servants in simple tunics silently served an array of exquisite, I'm not exaggerating, dishes. About a dozen people joined us, including the master of the house, who introduced himself as Isidore, Hermione, and another woman, neither young nor old, also of an indeterminate age, like Hermione and other Greeks. They all settled on couches, exchanging occasional phrases in the same ancient dialect. It seemed no one was particularly interested in the food, with some merely sipping wine. The entire scene felt like a sinister moment from a dark novel. "Imagine this as a scene from a novel," Isidore said to me. "Think of how Mr. Haggard might use this material. Have you read any works by Rider Haggard?" He laughed, and the sound was chilling. In that moment, I felt as though he wasn't human. I have no need to. It's he who should have come to me for ideas. I don't require anything from him. And it was then, whether from some intoxicating substance in the food or wine, or from the mysterious emanations of the scarab in my pocket, or perhaps the hypnotic gaze, that I realized I couldn't spring up and rush to the door or even draw my revolver to carve my way to freedom. Any rational person could have done so, not to mention a hero from a novel. But I was resigned to just sit there and listen to my host as he drew me into his fantastical, romantic tale that no one could adequately capture on paper. Even my own attempts to reconstruct the story seemed feeble. The scene took place 2,000 years ago, more precisely, in 30 BCE. Mark Antony and Cleopatra. The legendary Cleopatra, last of the Ptolemaic dynasty, had been defeated at Actium and retreated to Alexandria, awaiting their fate. The heavens filled with strange omens. At night, a mysterious prophecy was spoken, although the prophets themselves were never seen, having passed through the city and vanished into the desert. The prophecy proclaimed that Dionysus, Antony's patron deity, had abandoned him. Months of despair and despondency followed. Octavian's Roman legions approached the city. Loyal troops dwindled away. According to history and legend, Antony fell upon his sword and, mortally wounded, was carried to the mausoleum where Cleopatra had retreated. In her despair, believing Antony to be dead, she turned to the dark arts she had mastered through her deep fascination with the ancient sciences of Egypt. Other Ptolemies took pride in their Greek heritage and looked down on others as barbarians, but she embraced the arcane, enigmatic secrets of the land. From her tomb, she summoned shadows and awakened a powerful, ominous force from deep within the earth that transformed her very essence. She sacrificed her own blood and drank that of others. Blessed be her name. She became something other than human, neither demon nor god. That being endures to this day. I was among her followers, those who still live to serve her. And tonight we intended to call her forth from the darkness, so she could drink blood and share it with us. She was meant to come for my blood. That was the solution to the mystery. I had mistaken them for traffickers of stolen antiquities. Ha! Isidore would likely have found that amusing. He might have laughed his unsettling laugh and said, "Selling antiquities? No, we are the ancient ones ourselves." But he said nothing, as the joke would have seemed as mundane to him as the antics of a kitten he'd seen 100 times. I was being prepared for the sacrifice, the main purpose of this gathering. I tried to rise, but my limbs would not obey me. My head was clouded. I came to realize, whether someone told me, or I picked up on the thoughts of others, that Cleopatra's lost tomb was here, beneath or beside this house, or even part of it in another dimension. Its location remains a mystery to archaeologists to this day. I also understood that Antony was no longer of use to her, having become a worthless companion, so she allowed the Romans to discover his body, while she herself vanished. Do you remember the final scene in Plutarch? Did your master create this spring? And so on. This is what provokes the chilling laughter among her followers. Yes, they have their own jokes in eternity. Blessed be her name. You must know that Cleopatra, eternal and transformed, something greater than human, emerged to us that night from the darkness. Drums rumbled, strange chants filled the air. Distant melodies of flute and horn resonated. Massive doors opened, where I had expected nothing but a wall. The stones of the tomb shifted, with a quiet creak. Muffled thunder rolled, and she stepped forth to drink my blood and share it with the others. Her sacrificial dagger and chalice were prepared. But blessed be her name. I was destined to join this cursed and blessed company forever. That night, I came face to face with Cleopatra. I gazed into her eyes. Words fail to capture the experience. All I can say is that at the last moment, my rational mind took over, and I leapt off the table, pulled my revolver, and fired every round into her. It might seem that I missed, that I was drugged or my aim was unsteady, but I knew I had not missed. Yet the bullets did nothing. She only laughed, a chilling, terrible laugh. It was already late. We were alone in the darkness. The street lay deserted. I looked back at the Greek cafe. It seemed abandoned. The few candles that had been burning were out or nearly spent. The city had fallen into an unnatural silence. No dogs barked in the distance. No night birds called. No voices or laughter from late-night wanderers. Silence. Deep and listening. Sir Henry Macpherson began to laugh, and the sound made my blood run cold. The familiar, genial laugh of my mentor was gone. This was something else entirely. Well, what do you think, David? Quite the story, isn't it? And the ending, so tense and mysterious. Go on, critique it if you can. I value your opinion. You've always been a smart boy. I couldn't bring myself to speak. Here, he added, sliding the stone scarab across the table. An inexplicable force, one I couldn't resist, compelled me to pick up the figurine. David, you want to know why Cleopatra, after 2,000 years in her tomb and beyond, in a state that could be called posthumous, responded to my call and came to me? Well, let me assure you, she has done this before, luring Arabs, Persians, Turks, even Mongols into her darkness, when all these peoples ruled the world in turn, and her dark influence helped her manipulate them. She knows power is slipping away from Greece and Rome. And now, f'o-fum, I smell the blood of a brutish man one. Isn't it funny, David? Now she knows power comes from London, and now she beckons the British, David. That is her new aim. But there's something else. You doubt the truth of my story. You earnestly want to make yourself disbelieve a single word. There is one specific logical flaw that troubles you the most. Come on, my boy. Ask your question if you need to. Finally, I found the words and spoke. But, if your bullets had no effect on her, how did you manage to escape? In the darkness, Sir Henry's teeth glinted with a broad smile. I didn't escape, he replied. At that moment, Greek waiters led by a priest lunged at him from behind. They held a silver cross, daggers, and a wooden stake.